Joe Leibo from DeepMind. He's a senior staff engineer there and research scientist, and has received his PhD at MIT and now works with cooperation and with cultural evolution and institutional economics on the same sort of problems that we're looking at this weekend. So I'm very curious to see what his talk will be about on equilibrium selection risks of advanced AI, and I will just let you take the stage, Joel. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk about equilibrium selection risks of advanced AI, and let's jump in then. So I have to say what is an equilibrium first, and what are games and everything. So I'm going to do that as fast as possible because I imagine most people already know this. But in this game on the screen here is called Prisoner's Dilemma. It is a two-player game. There's two players. There's a player one who is also called the row player, and player two who's also called the column player. In this game is played by the row player picks a row of that matrix, and the column player picks a column of the matrix, and that selects a particular cell. And then the first of the two numbers in the cell, that becomes the reward of the row player, player one, and the second number becomes the reward of the column player, player two. Okay. And so the way game theorists think about games in this representation is, or at least one way to think about it, is you can imagine a certain status quo. Like, let's say currently both players are playing action C. So they're in the upper left corner of the matrix, and they're both getting a reward of 2. Then they can each ask themselves, well, from this current situation, would I like to change my action to the other choice, something else, in order to get a higher reward? And so if you think about it from the row player's perspective, player one's perspective, in the corner where they're both playing C, they could switch to the second row, which would mean playing D, and then get a 4. And since 4 is greater than 2, that would be a rational thing for them to want to do. Now, if they did that, of course, that means now everyone is playing in the lower left corner, and player 2 will be getting a score of 0. So player 2 could also ask themselves, should I switch to the other action that's available to me, which is to play D. And in this case, now that would give them a score of 1 when they previously got a 0, and so that would be favored as well. So they should switch. Now you could go through, so you'll end up in the lower right cell where both are playing D. And now everyone's getting a score of 1, whereas previously they were getting a score of 2. Now this logic would work out exactly the same way if we asked first about player 2. You could see it would go the other way around. It would also happen the same way if we started in other cells of the matrix. And even if we started in the lower right cell with both playing D, it would still end up in the same way, because neither player would want to change from that, because 0 is less than 1. So that means that the DD outcome, the lower right outcome, is the equilibrium of this game. And there's only one equilibrium of this game when you see this one-shot game. This is basically the definition of an equilibrium as well. It's when no one wants to unilaterally deviate. And I think that's all I need to say in this basic background. So I want to talk about equilibrium selection. So many games are not like the one on the previous slide. The one on the previous slide was special in that it had just one equilibrium. Actually, one more thing I need to say about it is that in game theory, you typically see these as like predictions, right? The equilibria are basically predictions about the world. Like if you're modeling something in the real world with a game, then the equilibria become the predictions for what would actually happen if people were playing this game in real life, or if people were playing doing something in some real social situation that was well modeled by this game. Then that would be the prediction. The prediction would be the equilibrium. Okay, so most games are not like that one, because that one had a unique prediction. It's a unique equilibrium. Many games are more like this one on the slide now. Here, there are 3 actions, A, B, and C, and there are 3 pure strategy equilibria. So if player 1 believes player 2 is going to play A, then player 1 should also play A, and shouldn't change. Same thing if they believe B. Same thing if they believe C. There's an AA equilibrium, a BB equilibrium, and a CC equilibrium. And there's nothing about the game, as it's written here, that could tell you which one is going to be selected. People talk about that as being a kind of an extraneous to game theory kind of thing. Like if you knew other things about the world, maybe you could make that prediction, but not just on the basis of the game as it is here. what kinds of things could tell you? Well, maybe in this social situation modeled by this game, A is like the default choice. So then you expect, okay, probably people aren't going to change the default, so I should just also pick that one. Or maybe that's one possible reason that you could come to a prediction. Another way you could get a prediction would be like maybe B and C are just like really, really hard to implement. Like it's not just a simple choice the way we framed it. It's like, you have to do something really difficult to play B or to play C. So then maybe that would predict that it would be A. So on its own, game theory can't tell you which equilibrium, but game theory plus extra kind of information can tell you. Now, just because it's these games are arbitrary, the equilibria here are kind of arbitrary with respect to this game representation, that doesn't mean that we're indifferent between them. Arbitrariness is very different from indifference. Here's an example to see why. So in this game that just appeared, now the CC equilibrium is getting a reward of 3 for both players, whereas the AA equilibrium is getting a reward of 1 for both players. So it's very everyone would not be indifferent between them. The CC one is clearly better. But it's still the case that if you believe everyone else is going to play A, then you should also play A. You can't unilaterally change between them. They're all still equilibria, even though it's kind of irrational if everyone could choose together to pick anything other than the CC equilibrium. Now, here's another thing that can happen. So conventions can also be unfair. So far, the examples I showed were with symmetric games. Here's what happens with an asymmetric game. So this game is called Bach or Stravinsky because the traditional way to describe it is to say that we have two players. They both want to go to a concert together, and the one player prefers to go to see Bach or hear Bach, and then the other player prefers Stravinsky to Bach. But both prefer to go together than to go alone to separate concerts. And so if action A is Bach, action B is go to Stravinsky. And so in this game, there are two pure strategy conventions, two pure strategy equilibria. There's the AA equilibrium, where player 1 gets a reward of 3 and player 2 gets a reward of 2. So that's kind of unfair in favor of player 1. Player 1 is getting a higher score. And then the other pure strategy possibility is the BB outcome, where player 1 gets a reward of 2 and player 2 gets a reward of 3. And that's unfair the other way around. Also, I should say, in games where there are multiple equilibria, we can call them conventions. I think that's a reasonable way to talk about it. These are kind of models of conventions in real life. And so then that makes the statement I made here about indifference, saying that some conventions may just be objectively better than others. We're not indifferent between conventions. Also, conventions may be unfair. Okay, so I just showed you that there can be unfair conventions in this game, but there can also be fair ones. So if you could, say, play this game over and over again, then you might take turns, and that would be a fair way to solve it. But that might be more cognitively demanding or something. You might need to have some memory or something like that. So in this case, there are various solutions. Some are unfair, some are fair. And here, doing something a little bit more sophisticated is a way to get to a more fair solution. What I'm going to show you in the rest of this talk is that is definitely not the usual case. Really, all kinds of things can happen as you change the intelligence or sophistication or other abilities of agents and systems. And that's really the message I want to kind of bring home here. Sometimes things get better when you add intelligence, but not always. So let's press on. So now the rest of my examples are going to be I'm going to have a bunch with multi-agent reinforcement learning, then I'm going to talk about more real-world kind of things later. So this is going to be the multi-agent reinforcement learning chunk here. So in these games, agents are walking around in a world, and they're partially observed, so they see just what's around them, and they're making choices of where to move. So they don't make single choices like cooperate or defect or something like that has strategic intention in a single moment. Instead, they kind of the strategic intention emerges from lots of small actions like movement actions in these games. And you can have agents learn in these worlds with reinforcement learning, which is what we typically do. So in this particular game, it's called Commons Harvest. So here, agents want to eat apples. So they're running around in the world looking for apples. And apples grow according to a rule which is density dependent. So the more apples that are in a local patch, the more quickly the apples in that patch will grow back. If all of the apples in the patch are depleted, then they will never grow back. None of them will ever grow back. So that leads to a kind of sustainability dynamic where you could eat very quickly and deplete a patch, and then that's kind of an unsustainable way to get rewards. Or you could kind of leave some around and wait for them to grow back, and you kind of have a more sustainable strategy. In this setting, episodes last for a certain number of steps, 1,000 steps, after which the game resets to an initial condition. So it's modeling like a renewable resource. It's not like a peak oil scenario or something where there's like something will never come back once it's gone. It's more like something that happens every year again and again the same way. Also in these games, agents can zap each other with a timeout beam, and if an agent that gets hit gets removed from the game for a while. So this lets us look at things like punishment and exclusion, and many of it you'll see in a moment what happens with that. So what I'm going to try and show you is that there's no simple relationship between cleverness or intelligence or learning and selecting good or fair conventions. I'll give some examples now. So people can see these videos, right? Hopefully someone will stop me if the videos aren't playing, but let's see. These are random agents in this world, and they move around randomly. You can see they also zap from time to time, and they are, it's collecting apples at some rate. If we kind of jump forward in the video, you see nothing much has changed. They're just moving around, eating apples. It's a sustainable, policy, and it just kind of lasts this way. It's kind of fair as well. They all get roughly the same scores, and the apples don't get depleted. If we go to the end, you see that they're still there. Okay. Let's now go to the next case. So now they're reinforcement learning agents, and we're going to let them learn. And what you find is that they very quickly learn to eat the apples as quickly as they possibly can. And all the apples are immediately gone, and now, because they all acted unsustainably, and this is a terrible outcome for everyone. Now there's nothing left for them to do for the rest of the episode. There's no apples left. They can't get any. There's no possible way to get positive rewards anymore. We can play it again because that was very fast. See, they immediately eat everything as fast as they can. Now this is because of the direction of their optimization. They're all learning. They're improving their policy locally around what they experienced, and all they experienced was, well, other players are eating at some rate, so I just need to eat faster than them. So everyone's gradient is pushing toward eating faster. So the faster they optimize, the faster they get to this bad equilibrium, which is really an attractor equilibrium because there's no way out of it. Now imagine how you would get out of it. You would have to show some restraint, right? Like one agent would be like, okay, I'm going to not eat that last apple and let it grow back. But then another agent would just eat it because that's always been the right thing for them to do in all of their experience, is to eat apples that they get a chance to eat. So there's no way that they could ever learn about how showing restraint could actually cause the apples to grow back, because that just never happens in their experience. So once you're in this equilibrium, you're really stuck there. There's no way out. Let's see another one. So now let's change the map. I've shown so far there was a random policy, so without learning actually did well. It got some it's got some score. It was sustainable, continued to get rewards the whole time, and then learning basically made them worse because they ate everything immediately, and then there was nothing left, and they all got terrible scores. So learning made them worse in that case. So let's now look at another example. So everything is almost exactly the same, but the only thing that's different is that there's now these walls in the map. So I'll show you random agents again. So random agents now are they are bouncing around, and so two of them started up closer to the resources. That was also true in the first case. But now we have a really unfair outcome because of the kind of structure of this map and the fact that they need to walk down these long corridors. The random agents basically don't do that by chance very often. So the ones that start out near the resources end up getting much higher scores than the ones that start out outside. So in this case, the random agents do have an unfair outcome, but it's still sustainable. They still continue to get rewards throughout the whole episode. I could jump further along, and you see that they're still eating apples, but it is unfair. Now let's see what happens when we introduce some learning here. So now these are reinforcement learning agents. They're going to have some training here, and just like before, we find that they quickly run in there and eat everything that they can as fast as possible. So this was another failure where everything was bad. So some learning led them to overconsume the resources again. And this is what it looks like. Now let's try it again with more learning in the same run. So with more learning, they find that there actually is a kind of a solution again. And that solution is basically to zap all the players as they come down the corridor and then effectively monopolize the resources for themselves, the ones that are inside. So now the ones that are inside are again back to the case where things are really unfair and in their favor. So adding intelligence here has led to the reemergence of the inequality and unfairness that we had before. So the effects of making things smarter or learning more are really dependent on what other factors, like what are the other, where are the other players, what is the map like, what is how does the resource work, everything like that. Also, the single agent case is really different, and I think this is actually really important because many people, especially in the AI community, have most of their intuition has come from thinking about single agent optimization settings, single agent reinforcement learning, or other things. And now in single agent world, things are really different. In a single agent case, it's much more clear. Like you can just make the agent smarter, and that will be better because. And that's what this picture is showing. This video is actually kind of more or less the optimal thing to do for a single agent here. And almost any reinforcement learning algorithm will find this. The only things that can go wrong are basically like local optima problems, which you can escape by kind of being smarter. There's no sense in which you could learn yourself into an attractor state that you can't get out of because of other people's learning dynamics, like there was in the multi-agent case. So multi-agent is very different from single agent in this regard. Equilibria are important. Let's try to shift now to more real-world examples that might of what could happen as we introduce more AI technology. So, which is really the point here. I want to argue that our real lives are dependent on many equilibria, many conventions that we may or may not fully understand, and they could be disrupted by new technologies. So here's a simple example. This is definitely not an important example, but I think it's illustrative. So let's say what you want to do is book a dinner and you have like an AI assistant, some kind of language model powered assistant application like running on your phone or something like that. And you want to book a dinner in some place that's very difficult to book a dinner. Like if people know London, Granary Square is a great example. It's hard to get a reservation. So you could say to your AI, can you please book a restaurant for me to have dinner in? And then you could just go off and say, like, I'm going to go take a shower now or something. And the AI could say, I'll find some options, and it'll go make 100 reservations for you. And then you come out of the shower and say to the AI, do you have any? And it says, yes, please pick one from this list. I'm sure there's one you'll like, and I'll cancel all the others. And then you pick one, and you have your dinner, and everything goes well, and it's fine. So in some sense, the AI did what the user wanted, but there's consequences of everyone doing this, and those consequences would be all because it made 100 reservations and then canceled 99 of them. So restaurant workers would have to spend more time on the phone if you do this, and eventually the restaurants would just stop taking reservations if everyone did this. And you'd have to have some other system for it. I'm sure we actually already do. So this is a case where the equilibrium changes. If previously it was possible to call a restaurant and make a reservation, and that would work out. It's not really possible in a world where you can just tell your AI to make 100 reservations and then cancel them. Maybe you'd have to pay a cancellation fee or something like that. So this is a simple change, but there could be many, many others lurking for similar reasons. So I'll summarize a bit and move on. So when we introduce new technology, it has the potential to disrupt our existing conventions. And our social reality is composed of a multi-scale mosaic of these conventions, norms, and institutions, all different kind of equilibrium concepts. The stability of that social reality depends on partially at least, on the costs of taking different actions. If certain actions we could take, like making restaurant reservations, just suddenly change in the cost, in how costly they are, they become really easy, say, that could radically change things. We don't know to what extent our conventions depend on those costs being the way that they are. And things could change at some speed, but not necessarily. Things are changing like in a way that's mediated by human behavior. So here's an example. So after social media became widespread, it took a few years for the effects of the disruption that it created to conventions, norms, and institutions to actually be felt. It took a few years for that. Most of the change was mediated by human behavior. It wasn't just like because social media existed, the change immediately happened. There may be first-order effects that happened quickly, but there were all the second-order effects that happened later, mediated by human behavior. So now we have large-scale generative AI widely available, and human behavior has not yet adapted to it. It's just like this, social post-introduction of social media, pre-understanding of the impacts time. So more change in society is likely coming, and that's true even if the AI models stopped improving, which they won't. It's not like overnight change I'm talking about. This is not like a fast takeoff AGI scenario, but it's also not really slow. These societal changes are driven by positive feedback dynamics as everyone is shifting to play their part in a newly emerging convention. So they can be relatively fast, as fast as human behavior. Now I have some kind of framework that we use to think about these kind of problems. We like to think about things in terms of a resource in the world that is making agents interdependent and generating misalignment problems to solve. So the resource could be, say, the restaurant workers' time when you're in the booking example, or it could be our collective attention, or it could be the number of fish in the ocean in a fishery, some kind of resource that could be natural or artificial, which everyone has incentives with respect to. Maybe it's a calendar and you're booking time in a calendar or something. So everyone is taking actions with respect to some resource, and everyone's rewards depend on that resource. And agents have different preferences with respect to states of that resource. And this kind of setup gives rise to a tension between individual and collective rationality, or at least it can. And resolutions of these tensions, these misalignments, are conventions, norms, and institutions. We could even define them that way. So a lot is known about resources in institutional economics, and in particular with the underlying picture where institutions are kind of solutions to governance challenges with respect to resources. At least for my part, I was very influenced by reading the work of Elinor Ostrom in this area. So she won the Nobel Prize in 2009 for working on these kind of things. And her kind of main line of work has always been about how different resources give rise to different kinds of governance challenges and then demand different kinds of institutional solutions. And so some things need to be solved in ways that could be more locally and decentralized run, or some things maybe could be run in a more centralized way. It really depends on the properties of the particular resource, and there are no panaceas is a kind of a refrain from this line of work. And there are lots of particular frameworks for understanding properties of particular goods that come out of it. So forests are different from fisheries, or different from pastures, or different from calendar time. But you can make predictions about them. It's not just like saying, well, everything's different and you have no idea. You actually do have ways of making specific predictions about like what kinds of equilibria exist and what kinds of institutions would be successful or unsuccessful. And I think if she were around today, she would probably be very interested in this question of like, as you introduce new technologies, then and change the costs of different actions, how might the equilibria shift, and how might which institutions are effective change? Okay, and then we also use this. This is like another kind of summary of the picture here. So you can say that there are diverse agents in the world, like humans and AIs, and we're all kind of inhabiting the world together. So the diverse agents, along with properties of the resource, are jointly causing a particular misalignment challenge. And misalignment challenges call for governance arrangements. Those are the solutions. They could look like conventions like, let's take turns. That's a taking turns is some kind of conventional solution to a particular misalignment challenge. Or it could be in like a dividing the cake kind of thing. Like I'll cut the cake first, and then you can pick your slice after that. And that's a kind of a stable convention you can have. Or you could have more complicated things, like you could say that some particular pollution of the environment is illegal or something, or maybe that you need a conflict resolution strategy that requires layers of rules about how you make rules and change rules, like a constitution or something. Whatever the governance arrangement is, we can ask a bunch of different questions about it. We can ask, with respect to the resource, like, is it sustainable? And is it acceptable to the stakeholders? Does it violate human rights? Is it Pareto optimal? Is it fair? We can ask all these questions. These are like properties of the governance arrangements that you can come to. And the question that we're now asking is, will these governance arrangements still function as we introduce new technologies? Now, this is really my last slide, but we can talk about, this is meant to be kind of a discussion slide, so we can stick on this for a while. So the main point here has been a lot of the conventions, norms, and institutions that are composing our social reality may be supported, at least to some extent, by human limitations, which are being rapidly removed if we change the costs of different actions. And the rest of the slide is just a bunch of examples. So here's one I like. So if self-serving disinformation is now cheap and easy to produce and distribute, which is true, we're talking a lot already about the first order effects of that, like on elections and on public health. But the second order effects might be even more important. Now, these are the things that are kind of mediated by the human behavioral reaction to everyone knowing that, say, videos can be easily faked or whatever. And that could be even more important than the first order effects. Because it could, say, erode the value of like video recorded evidence of crimes. That's how there was the evidence of George Floyd's murder was a video that someone took. But if no one trusts anyone's video recordings anymore, that would have been harder to deal with. And it would increase pressure on our systems of trust and reputation and such. Now, the flip side of that is that good content is probably also cheap and easy to produce and distribute. But the question of that is, does it then disincentivize humans from producing it? Does it, like, in some sense, pollute the digital commons with machine-generated content? And that could be important, particularly if you can't train future models on past model-produced content, which some evidence might be difficult. Other things that may change different equilibria, like if we have the ability to do lightning fast negotiation on our behalf, like if we are kind of outsourcing some of our agency to AI agents that act on our behalf, do some things maybe depend on negotiation being slow? One example is right now in lots of places, you can call your broadband company and threaten to move your business to a different provider, and that might get them to improve something. But that's only because in the current equilibrium, it's annoying to call them and complain. Once you have an AI assistant that can just do that on your behalf, then all of the broadband providers will have to have a different response. So the point I'm making is just that it's really unclear. Many things will change as different actions for people become easier or less annoying. And we might find that some of our very important equilibria in our social reality are upheld by very flimsy support. And the ones that get us are going to be the ones that we don't see coming, not the ones that we do. And I'll just stop here and can happy to discuss with anyone who wants to be here.
Thank you so much, Joel. Everyone's of course sitting at home clapping along. So a big hand to you for the wonderful presentation. If anyone has any questions, you can just raise your hand at the bottom of the screen or write them in the chat, which is available in the top right. And I can maybe just kick off here. I'm curious to hear which sort of resources you see as some of the most important or some of the most influential in this sort of change of conventions that we see from AI as a technology.
I mean, I'm curious what you think are the most important here. I think I put mine on the slide.
Yeah.
It's always, I really mean the last point, that it's, the ones that we don't really, the ones that we miss in advance are going to be the most important ones. It's always very hard to be sure, like what exactly is going to be unstable until things happen. But I do think we need to do more. Uh, like if there was some way we could have some kind of more data-driven type, simulation platform or something like that to try to make predictions about this, I think that would be really, really valuable.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe the better way to think about it. Like, what's a good methodology to try to identify these things? Because otherwise, it's just going to be too biased of us trying to kind of, what do we come up with when we happen, we think about it. But if there's some methodology where we could try to kind of elicit these things, and maybe something involving simulations using language models in some ways. Language models also have some kind of summary of all of human knowledge in them. We can elicit their help in figuring this out.
Yeah, perfect. Um, all right, we have Forfire who has requested to speak, so I'm inviting you to the stage now.
Thank you. I just had a question regarding, and I'm sorry for the background noise here. I had a question regarding people that are empowered by AI assistant agents or even organizations that are thus empowered. Isn't there a substantial danger that some groups or some individuals that have access to the most advanced AI assistants will then be able to leverage that to further increase wealth inequality, or rather purchasing power inequality, which is the metric that actually matters?
I think yes. Do you have any implications of
Well, I can
that are?
imagine, as some already wealthy people are doing, purchasing land and then renting it out, becoming more effective rent seekers and impoverishing everyone else, may be an issue, although maybe not one shared by most people present in this conference, because we probably all come from privileged backgrounds. But I imagine there's a large portion of people who will not have access to top of the line AI tools or assistants, even for 10 years or more from now. And they will be largely taken advantage of by those who do.
Yep. I totally follow what you're saying and agree with that. That is a real issue. I think there's another way to see it, maybe, which is, I'm not sure if it's useful or not, but it's already the case that very wealthy people have personal assistants anyway, human personal assistants.
Yeah, and they're not very
You know,
effective. They're,
well, but they're
they're
more
only
effective
not
than
very
not having
harmful
one,
because
and
that is true. Yes.
so in some so in the to an equality question, right? It's in some sense it's democratizing that, right? Maybe everyone now has a quasi-effective personal assistant, whereas before only the super wealthy had them, and
Well,
that's in some
I
sense it's
suppose,
slightly better, but it's obviously not going to be
yeah.
everyone. So I do take your point. There's going to be a digital divide, and that.
The concern I have is, and I don't want to reduce the importance of anyone's degree of poverty, but I believe the important point is the relative degree to which something can be leveraged. Because if someone can literally be 100,000 times more effective at accruing purchasing power than someone else, that's very different from having a personal assistant who can double your productivity, for example.
Yeah, that may be that may be a different thing that could also that's different from the kind of we're democratizing access to personal assistance. That's more of a there could be some kind of qualitatively new ability that appears in some people and not others. I guess it depends on what the ability is, right? So we were a minute ago we were talking about like being able to do like lightning fast negotiation on your behalf. Maybe that's really different from being able to do just cheap negotiation at human speed through an assistant. I guess for each of these questions we have to ask like what's really some effects are coming from the fact that now everyone can do something that previously only the very wealthy who could hire a human to do it could do. And some effects are coming from the fact that it's also faster. And that's and I don't know what the implications of these things are. I think it's going to depend a lot on each particular context and everything.
Yeah, nice. Thank you very much, Forfire. I'm also you mentioned here the lightning fast negotiation as well. Do you see some areas where these sorts of equilibrium shifts are better, or where it's a positive effect? And how does that match in with some of the negative effects as you see it in terms of the trade-offs that will happen?
Yeah, well, the positive effects are a lot of the first order things are positive, right? We now have the ability to ask ask Midjourney to create a image of whatever we want instantly, and whether we're a good artist or not, we can have that. So that improves the lives of everyone who wants that and didn't have it before. So that's kind of a clear thing. We'll be able to having an agent that can do negotiation on your behalf probably is going to be useful, and especially if it's something that is you end up with some kind of record of what's happened, and you can tweak it to act differently in the future. You can give it your preferences, and you can trust it, and you can assume that you can know that it's private, and all these kind of properties you would want it to have. If all those things are there, then that could be really useful. The effect of it would be it's going to then matter a lot how it's kind of distributed, right? If half the world has it and the other half doesn't have it, or half the world has it, a better one than the other half, that could introduce its own distortions. Like maybe the better ones just negotiate better. So some people have the latest version of their bot, and it negotiates better on its behalf, and it just creates this kind of a bias in their behavior, in their favor. Or maybe it's like the people who update their software every time a new version comes out, like the fastest end up ahead, and that's like becomes like an like unnoticed bias in people's lives.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, so you imagine
it's
the sort of intelligence ramp off or ramp on would be seen in these updates, and people would suddenly have
mhm.
this inequality happen between them.
It reminds me of this concept I heard recently of invisible discrimination, where you have where no one even knows about the discrimination, right? And if you imagine a classifier, which is some opaque machine learning system that's, say, deciding, I don't know, like whether people are creditworthy or something like that, something that people, about people, but it's based on some features, and it's like very opaque. It's just, it's not understandable, let's say. We all are checking, of course, if it's discriminating on the basis of gender and race and all the things that we know to check for. But what if it's discriminating on the basis of just some weird features that are like, some particular projection of something? And so some people who ostensibly have nothing in common actually do have something in common, which is specifically that classifier is discriminating against them. So this kind of invisible discrimination can happen. And I wonder if there might be more things like that arising from these kind of complex convention changes and stuff.
Yeah, so invisible discrimination, I assume that means like it interprets some underlying feature vector or something from the
Yeah,
multi-signal vectors.
maybe there's just like there's a local optimum in the classifier or something, and something is some discrimination is happening, but no one necessarily people can't organize to advocate for themselves to stop, because they don't even know that it's happening, because ostensibly they have nothing in common with each other, except in the eyes of the classifier they do.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, anyone from the audience are very welcome to ask any questions or come with their perspectives on what might be some of their worries regarding which sorts of human resources or second order effects are worrying in this regard. Um, and you can of course just raise your hand or write in the chat. Otherwise, I guess some of the um, some of the big effects we'll see on a second and third order might be on our sort of democratic systems, and that both is quite relevant for this lightning fast negotiation, but also for fake news and for all these sorts of issues. Do you do you have any sort of imaginings of what that future looks like, or any sort of where are we going with this? What will the new equilibrium look like, or the new conventions?
I guess one thing I mean, obviously I don't know the answer, but
Yeah,
if I think that there's something really important about the fact that we're putting more pressure on our systems of trust and reputation. Because if we can't trust videos anymore, then we kind of lose an epistemic backstop that we previously had, where if it was a video, then you would know that it would be just like very costly to fake that. That's very unlikely, and that would any video would just automatically be reasonably good evidence. And that's kind of how we've treated it for a good long while. We're going to lose that, and that means that the only way we're going to be able to trust anything is via our systems of whatever it is that we trust. Like if I'm someone who trusts the New York Times, then I'll trust things that the New York Times posts, because I'll trust that the New York Times has fact checking and has a system of people that they trust, and there'll be a kind of a network of trust, and everything will have to kind of go through these networks. But it's putting more pressure on them than than we previously were. Now, there's a flip side to this, which I only realized recently, which is that it's actually relatively new that we have video as our epistemic backstop. We didn't previously, for most of human history, have that. Most of human history, all there was hearsay. There was people, prior to computers and prior to video and prior to photography a little bit, but prior to all that, people only had to rely on whatever other people said, and so that meant that it was always like that. People would trust based on the people they trusted telling them things, and so it was based on our kind of our architecture of trust and reputation and stuff. So maybe this is okay. Maybe this is just how humans have been for a long time. But also maybe our world's a lot more complex now. We talk to a lot more strangers. We interact with and depend on a lot more strangers than we did prior to the invention of photography. So it might be a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I can totally imagine that. I guess I personally also imagine that as Midjourney and these image models became even better, even just 6 months ago or something like this, that we would see even more fake news or even more of these sorts of epistemic backstops, as you mentioned, fall off or get disrupted. And I don't think we've seen that to the degree that one could have imagined. So that's a curious phenomenon apropos what we used before as networks of trust. Yeah.
We haven't seen yet like a kind of a moment of kind of coordinated attempted to do something with it, like in an election, which I think will happen for sure. The next election is going to have multiple coordinated attempts going from different directions, and the effect might be that people will just stop believing any of it entirely. They'll just completely, maybe it'll be big enough that everyone will learn that you shouldn't trust random websites, even if it's a video.
Yeah.
But I'm not too optimistic that will go that way. But that should be the equilibrium. That's what the equilibrium logic would lead you to think, that people would entirely depend on trust and reputation and not depend on videos seeming trustworthy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and I guess some of the sorts of changes we have to make as a society or the governance interventions can be quite extensive as well. I know with Estonia they have schools that teach fake news discrimination due to the effects of Russia, and maybe we have to do even more of that. Who knows? Yeah, we are coming towards the end. If anyone has any last questions, or if Joe, you have any last comments, then we can take those. Otherwise, I think we will end the stream here. And thank you so much to Joel